Hello and thanks for joining us from our studios in Israel. I'm Aaron Porras, here with ILTV's Morning Briefing. The region is spiraling into conflict in the aftermath of some of the biggest clashes between Israel and enemy forces in decades. The IDF is conducting a full investigation into what exactly caused the crash of an Air Force F-16 fighter jet yesterday. They now believe that shrapnel, likely from a Syrian anti-aircraft missile, is what downed the jet. To put this in perspective, the last time enemy forces shot down an Israeli jet was in 1982 during the First Lebanon War. Indeed, the exchange of fire seen over the weekend was some of the worst in over a decade. Things first escalated into violence after an Iranian drone in Syria breached Israeli airspace. Israel downed the drone, then launched a counterattack on Syrian military targets. An Israeli F-16 was hit during an exchange of fire. Fortunately, the pilot managed to fly the aircraft back into Israel and ejected before the crash. He was critically injured but is now in stable condition. The downing of the aircraft prompted a second Israeli aircraft attack, this time targeting Syrian anti-aircraft defenses. At this time, at least 6 Syrian troops from President Assad's regime have been killed in those strikes. The IDF has confirmed that at least 4 Iranian targets in the region were also hit in the airstrikes. Needless to say, Israel is bracing for the worst. Senior Egyptian officials have invited a Hamas delegation headed by Hamas leader Ismail Haniyeh to Cairo this week. The visit comes after an Egyptian security apparatus launched a series of major military operations in the Sinai against ISIS terrorists. Earlier this year, ISIS declared war on Hamas after the Egyptian chapter of ISIS stated that Hamas did not do enough to stop United States President Donald Trump from declaring Jerusalem the capital of Israel. Hamas officials are also hoping to discuss the deteriorating humanitarian situation in Gaza and how the Egyptian government can help improve the crisis. The talks are also expected to focus on the failure of the Hamas-Fatah reconciliation talks. Ties between Israel and India have been skyrocketing recently, especially after Prime Minister Netanyahu's trip to India last month, the first ever visit of an Israeli Prime Minister to the country. But now it looks like India is doing a bit of a balancing act. Indian Prime Minister Modi has just visited PA President Mahmoud Abbas in Ramallah, the first trip of its kind in 30 years. Though India's friendship with Israel has blossomed in recent years, things weren't always that way. India actually voted against the UN's partition plan of Palestine in 1947, as well as Israel's admission into the UN after the creation of the state in favor of recognizing the Palestinians instead. Flash forward a few decades though, and India is now the single largest buyer of Israeli military tech in the world. But just 1 month after Netanyahu visited India, Prime Minister Modi now finds himself in Ramallah re-cementing old ties with the Palestinians. Abbas has just asked India to step in and fill the gap left by the United States in future peace talks with Israel, after no longer recognizing the United States as an impartial negotiator. Modi took the opportunity to hail Yasser Arafat as, quote, one of the greatest leaders in history, signaling that he may be prepared to represent the Palestinians in peace talks. But by praising a figure that Israel generally deems to be a terrorist leader, it remains to be seen if Israeli leaders would also accept India as an intermediary in negotiations. As the United Nations Palestinian Refugee Agency continues to fight for survival, over half of the Democrats in the United States Congress are now urging President Donald Trump to rethink his position. President Trump slashed over half of the United States aid to UNRWA last month, hoping to force UNRWA to reform. So far, the agency has simply been trying to look elsewhere for the funding deficit it now faces, though. According to a letter sent to the president on Friday and signed by 102 Democrats, quote, continuing to freeze this aid will harm American interests by exacerbating the threats facing both peoples and reducing the United States' ability to help the Israelis and Palestinians reach a two-state solution, end quote. Around 15 other donor countries have now pledged funds to help the United Nations Relief and Works Agency, but the United States was one of the organization's largest donors, and UNRWA representative Peter Mulreen said they were still facing a, quote, existential financial crisis, end quote. UNRWA serves some 5 million people across the Palestinian territories, as well as Lebanon, Jordan, and Syria. In somewhat shocking news, the international boycott, divestment, and sanctions movement against Israel, Israeli agencies, and Israeli individuals has now been nominated for the 2018 Nobel Peace Prize by Norwegian MP Bjørnar Moxnes. According to Moxnes, speaking to the Middle East Eye News site on Friday, quote, the B.D.S movement is a legitimate, peaceful, non-violent movement trying to push the Israeli government to abide by international law and trying to struggle for a peaceful solution in Palestine and the Middle East, end quote. Already responding to this nomination is Likud Knesset member Sharren Haskel, who in a letter written to Norway's ambassador to Israel and several other top parliamentarians in Norway, wrote, quote, "There is nothing peaceful about delegitimizing a country's academic and cultural institutions that are critical to creating an environment conducive for peace," end quote. "It is clear that the BDS movement's ultimate goal is to destroy the state of Israel," she continued. Israel has indeed long been fighting against the international boycott of Israel, arguing that the movement is based in anti-Semitism due to its delegitimization, double standard, and demonization applied to the Jewish state. Pro-BDS activists like Maximus himself say that that's preposterous, and that BDS is not against the Jewish people, but against the state, which no doubt breaks international law. That's all for now. I'm Aaron Porras, and see you later with our main daily broadcast from Israel at 2 p.m. Eastern Time.